and I'm a lead developer at 7digital. So I wanted to give an experience report on how we do continuous delivery. So it's somewhere between an introduction into what it is and how we've gone through doing it. You've probably not heard of us, but this is our company like a year ago. We just drew another team project together. But we have our own web-facing store where we sell DRM-free and high-quality music. So, iTunes and Google and all Amazon and all that, we're in the same space, but we come without all the kind of need for an iPhone or an iPad or all this other buy-ins. You can just get the music with us. That's what we do. And we've also got access on a range of devices. And because we're platform agnostic, we don't require you to buy in. We supply a lot of the music for other things like Samsung, BlackBerry, Sonos. Trying to think of any other things, but if it's not iTunes powered or Amazon powered, it's probably us. So quite great. And we've got an API behind all of this stuff, which is an open platform, so that you can all kind of grab a key if you want and have a play around with the metadata if you want to have a look at. So we've got small clients, big clients, lots of different clients in the same API. So how long would it take your organization, and it keeps Americanizing that, to deploy a change that involved just one single line of code in your business? And could you do this in a repeatable, reliable fashion? Anyone have an answer? Long time. I'll take long time. Well, in 7digital, we've got it down to under a couple of hours. You could probably do it less, but that's rushing it. So continuous delivery is a deployment pipeline. Much like a processing pipeline in code, it's a series of steps that each of your changes must go through before it is released out to production. Okay. And you want your pipeline to be repeatable and reliable so that you can do it again and again and have trust in it. Unlike this. I think that's just how I water. Oh, guys. One of the major steps of it is continuous integration. So everyone's changes that have been committed together get built together by a CI server. In our place, we use Team City. There's cruise control, loads of others, but that's the first essential step of the deployment pipeline. Automated tests come next, and they're run after the continuous integration. You've got automated unit tests, integration tests, acceptance tests, different levels, part of that feedback loop that we heard about from Martin. So you tap that into our continuous delivery pipeline. And scripted deployment processes. So after you compile it all together, you run all your tests on it, you're happy with it, you can get it deployed out to production with a single click of a button, and it's going to be the same every time because you scripted it. So the features of doing continuous delivery, I mean, you've heard some of this already, you can make your changes really, really small, and your deployment packages really, really small, which reduces the risk of getting those changes out. Because you can always roll them back, you know what they were small, just this thing happened. And if you reduce risk, people are more likely to be flexible and more likely to try things. If you're scared, not scared of saying it. Wicked. Definitely fairly quick. So as you've already heard today, it can give you faster feedback on what your change is for. So you can set up what you think is going to happen, release it out there on its own with no other things in it, whatever your change is, and get that feedback from production without having to wait months to act on it immediately. And finally, you've had this one too. Inventory is code that you would have sitting there not making you money, but it's spent you money because you've coded it. And in that time, it could even go obsolete by the time it goes out. So by having the pipeline ready, small changes, get it out there, see the effect of it, don't have it sitting there in the back of the shop, not selling, not making money. So about, I think, 4 years ago at 7digital, I just want to give an idea of where our situation was and felt like, because I think one of our development managers uses the quote of the Red Queen in, I forgot what it's called, but she says basically running on the spot to keep standing still, that kind of thing. It kind of felt like that for a while. In fact, this was our architecture at the time. You've heard all about people with monolithic architectures, and this was us. One massive API application, one shared database, lots of people working on it. As you can imagine, that's just not maintainable, scalable. Doing changes to it's very hard, all that kind of thing. We also had shared domain code. Hooray! That was bad too, so we've learned today. And managing all of that and doing any changes with it is kind of flaky. No one wants to touch it. They're scared. If they fix that bug down in that domain library down there, they're possibly going to break something they don't know about on one of the shared, one of the consuming applications. So nobody fixed them, nobody touched them. And because you're too scared to touch and fix and refactor, you spend a lot of time fixing bugs, and we did. It was a lot of time. We started tracking things, and I can show you the data for this at some point. But you spend more time fixing the bugs than you were actually putting in features, and that's demoralizing. No one wants to be fixing things. So we took time out, we stopped. We had to assess the situation, slow down, and decide what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go. We came up with the idea that we'd move to a service-oriented architecture. Haha, microservices! So that's exactly what we did. We would try and break all that API up into individual domains, that kind of thing, all that. We would put together our own deployment scripts. We would make this one serving massive building deployment scripts that would fix all of our problems, provide us with walking skeletons. Does everyone know that term? So that's where you, lots of nodes, but not too many. So that's basically the ability to release a small slice of your code out to production to test the whole process. That's your skeleton walking out the door. We automated that dependency chain. We didn't make it go away, unfortunately. It's all still there, slowly chipping at it. But by automating it, we were able to, it's easier to fix it. You know that it's going to get sucked in that updated library. And you can start chipping a bit. And that's one of the essential steps, actually getting your whole architecture fixed. So try that one. I also focused on technical debt. We had an extra stand-up each morning for a while. So after your normal stand-up, all the teams with representative would go to another mini one where we'd have on a screen all of our broken builds. And we'd all bring it to the forefront, as in, we've got to fix this stuff up, everybody. And because we were facing it every day, like with a stand-up, it got attention and got fixed. Is anyone aware of the testing triangle? A few nods there. So most people's testing suites look a lot like this. You've got lots of end-to-end tests, because that's where you started out. You use a monolith, so you put your tests on the edge. And they take ages to set up, and they're kind of flaky because you've got so many things that you're reliant on. Then you've got your acceptance tests again. Still pretty big, but not so bad. And not many unit tests because you've gone outside in. But over time, you need to try and flip that around, and the advantages of doing that is it's faster. Each one of these, you can run these really, really quickly with unit tests. You cover most of what you need to do. Acceptance tests for, no edge cases on these kind of things. It's more a case of does it fulfill the requirements. And end-to-end tests like smoke tests, have I got the whole system working together? You don't need much more than that because you've covered it already. And that, actually, if I go back to this, all of this stuff I've just covered. Now, when I said it was like 4 years ago, still doing most of this. This kind of change in a company is long. It takes a long time. Just wanted to warn everybody. On the other side, we were focusing on the culture of the team. All of that other stuff is technical. I think you can all gather what all that's all about. And it's all within your realm, it's all within your domain, and you can all do it. Maybe. So we moved to smaller product teams as well. That's just been mentioned in the previous talk too. And the product teams include different factions. So you've got like the dev, you've got QAs, you've got product managers. And rather than being around a project, which has a beginning and an end, you're around products. So these are like your little babies, as it were, and you own them, and you feel a lot more in control, and you care a lot more, I think, by being smaller as well. You're a lot more flexible and fluid in the way you work. And when I say small, most of our teams are like 4 people. I mean, small. Yeah. No, it's fine.
When you say small products, do you mean ongoing products?
Yes. 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 For example, there's a API root team. There's a .com team. They do the website. There's a payments team that just handle the way that we deal with the payments, that kind of thing. So we just find a product or somebody that needs looking after. And the team will do it. Visualizing everything. This is classic Kanban stuff. We felt that helped with the culture too, because if you can get everyone to see what you're working on outside of the dev team as well as inside. You get a lot more buy-in, I think. Recently, our systems team were having trouble getting everyone understanding how much they've got to fix stuff. So we suggested they try, like the people coming up in management and saying, what do you mean you've got so much to work on? So we suggested they try visualizing as well, make their like emergency cards red or something. So next time that someone comes over, they've got this wall of red. And they're like, that's why. And it kind of helps. We also moved everyone around, we jumbled them up. There's no sales and account managers and that team over there, and then the dev over here. It's more a case of we put them next to each other. So you've got like the music team who deal with curating the music on the site, getting the deals and the sales. They sit next to the .com team. Cross communication, understanding of the problem domain, and breaks up the whole us and them.
Just one question about that, particularly like the sales and marketing. When you put them in a dev team, do you find that you get impedance mismatches because the salespeople are on the phone all the time?
There is a bit of a problem with noise at one point. Yeah, we did have a bit of a thing about that, but it's open plan anyway, so it's kind of, and as a pair program, it was a little hard to kind of say, be quiet. But yes, you can. And but on the other hand, you get that kind of water cooler effect. You can ask, hey, I've got a client over here who wants to.
But also, the interesting thing about it is because the usual problem is because you've got a whole mess of these guys in one spot, and they kind of take over, they radiate over the areas around them, so you get this whole low grade bundle around the whole of the office around them. Whereas if you break them up, you're breaking the conversations up, and you're making them go into the teams that
yes, exactly, yes. It makes that conversation around what your product is effectively when you start breaking up those barriers. It was a really good move, I think, that we did. Initially met with a whole, no, we're not to sit next to people and move, but it really worked. It really did. And we work a lot closer together. It's fantastic. Oh, we took a lot of time to actively combat our blame culture as well. If you're going to have the ability for people to deploy small things with low risk, they've got to feel like if they send that change out, they're not going to get lynched. Things are more likely to break in a continuous delivery environment. Yep.
How did you do that?
One of the things is like this. We have postmortems, we call them, and they're blameless postmortems. So the idea is to try and find out some actions at the end of it. We understand that people are part of a system. No one person is usually at fault of something. I read a story on Hacker News about a junior developer who managed to delete the users in a database on production. You've got to ask yourself a few questions. Is that developer the one at fault? Or the system admin who let him have rights on the production database? Why is there no backup of these users somewhere else? One person is generally not to blame, so it's trying to find out what we can do to put things into place to prevent that from happening again. Does that answer that?
Enough, yes.
Yeah, so we have like these postmortems, and this in particular is kind of like a fishbowl session. Does anyone know that concept? It's where you kind of have a load of people, like we are now, but you'd have, say, like 3 or 4 chairs at the front, and only the people at the chairs are allowed to speak. It means that people can get up and talk, but you're also having people listening. So this was a fishbowl about how we would solve a particular problem. No one notes taking, and you could discuss things with the whole team to find out what happened with that problem. We always make sure the actions are followed up as well after any of these postmortems. So I think they happen every 2 weeks, the action follow-up. So, yeah. Self-improvement as well. We put a lot of time into everybody, not just the devs, not just the system people or QA or anything, into trying to get everyone to understand why it's important to know what else is out there and what you can learn from. We have innovation time, which is like the 20% time that people no longer have. More like only 5% for us, but it's there. Focus on yourself, improvement. We have events each week that we call cross-team code reviews. The whole point is that if one team is working on something really cool, they can hold an hour in the meeting room and show it to all the other teams. So all that cross-learning stuff as well. We really, really make space and time for it. Not during lunch hour or after work, because it's important enough to be part of your workday. And that sends a message as well, as in, this isn't extracurricular, it's your job. It's cowboy hippie. And the retrospectives as well, we've got the other teams doing them. We've got the management team doing retrospectives, the marketing team doing retrospectives. So they can also come up with actions and feedback to everyone else with them. That I think was excellent, because again, if their actions and their own self-reflection, part of that feedback loop, can be fed back into us, it can be fed back into the product, and it can then be tried out and deployed. And then we'll get the feedback from the clients to see if the ideas work.
Sorry, do you do your retrospectives together or do you do them separate?
Team-based, they
Okay.
tend to be. So the product team will do one, and that product team, like I said, includes a QA, possibly a systems person, depending on where we're working on the product manager. Not always sales and marketing or management, they'll have their own within themselves and give us the actions. It would be nice to try one actually, together. It's a nice idea. Yeah. To go back with the visualizing thing, we've got monitors around the office. Every team has a couple of dashboards that they can put on whatever metrics they feel is necessary for their products. That's really great for your own team, but it also helps outside of your team. This is an example of where a couple of teams were working together. The content delivery team, the systems team, and I think the API team were all working together on increasing our download speeds. And you can see that we managed to increase the download speeds massively at one point. And you could tell that this was sent around in the office like as an email, like, yes, we've all done it. And that helps with the whole understanding of what you're doing and the feedback, and everyone else can see the feedback. That's understandable by someone who's not in depth. We made it better. So radiating metrics is another way of getting some kind of buy-in and understanding of what you're doing. Spreadsheets. Oh, I'm sorry. We have one. Every team has to fill in what work they've started and finished. It's not much, it takes like 10 minutes. But the thing is, you can bring out metrics after it. I always call this no exercise fighting with spreadsheets. If someone wants to come at you with numbers, come back with more numbers. Yes, we have been doing really good things. So over time, we collected out cycle time. Does everyone know what cycle time is? I don't see any no's. Anyway, I'll describe it. It's the time it takes from your card to get from being created to being deployed. It's fine. Cycle time. So over 2009 to 2011, you can kind of see that our cycle time went down quite a lot. Again, this is going back to how long it takes for these changes to work in the organisation. That's 2 years. And then, but in 2011 to 2012, balanced out. We found our cycle time. You can see this one up here where the cycle time goes nuts. That was a really demoralising point when we were trying to do a big jump of flipping around some of our tests. Our acceptance tests on the router were failing quite regularly, quite often. So we had to take time out and literally focus on that for a couple of weeks, and all the cycle times went up. It was really hard fixing all the bugs and everything on that point. We'll go through it and look afterwards. Items completed. So you can see in same periods, 2009 to 2011, slightly within a few more items. That's okay. But then as soon as we got cycle time balanced out, our number of items we're actually completing at that time shot up.
Chris,
Very slow change. Hi.
nice graphs.
The data is available. I'll send you a link.
I was wondering if you get any fancier with the statistics, or just look at trend lines and averages. Do you get into looking for distributions, deviations?
What's his name? He's on ACCU. He does metrics in R. We gave him all of our data,
Right.
and he had a look at it. So I can't remember what he came out with, but there's a whole report that our CTO does every year,
Yeah.
which you can download. It's just released this year's one. So you can have a
You
look
do a
at that.
bit of it.
A bit of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because everyone kind of looks at averages and trend lines. Sometimes getting a bit fancy statistics.
Yeah,
So I just went,
that's why we try to give it to someone else to have a look at. I think you can get his data too, and what he found out. I can't remember his name. It's called Derek.
oh, Derek Jones, yeah.
Yeah. But if you want to source data and try your own metrics, you can as well. But again, so slow. That was a 3-year period. So if anyone's tried this kind of stuff and they're like, it's not working, that's because it gets worse before it gets better. Don't give up on it. So where are we now? Oh no. There we go. Yes. So this is our architecture now, more like it. We have a facade in front of all of our API calls. this is mostly like doesn't really do much, this facade, it just manages the routing. So if a call comes in for say something like /release/details, it gets sent off to the release API. Or if it's searches, it goes into the search API. So that's all that does in the end, is knowing which one of these small individual things it goes into. And they've got their own teams, then they've got their own database roughly. And each one of these can be deployed on their own. They're all working just on these. So deploy the payments API, deploy the search API, whatever. And they're developed independently. Okay. And we've got our single button deployments. We did our scripts. When we want to deploy, press that one button, out it goes. And a rollback procedure, which is kind of more of a roll forward procedure. It uses the same script as the deployment scripts, it's just you deploy the previous version. So if anything does go wrong in your little trial, your little small change, look at your metrics, find out what it is, roll it back, then take time to chill out and really resolve it and try again.
How do you handle live data?
Live data, what do you mean by live data?
So, like, I don't know if you're having, like, if you migrate any data during your
everyone
deployment
asks
script.
about data. Yeah, we can do, we've got a system that we wrote in, handcrafted ourselves, which deals with migrations for us.
Okay.
Something very similar to the Reggae one. It's not too far
got
off it. And that will do non-breaking deployments. So generally most of our changes are additive. We tend not to destroy whole columns or tables or that kind of stuff. They tend to be added on to. So it's not, we haven't really touched the tough stuff when you do for the days. Try not to do that. But because each of these teams now are pretty much self-enclosed, like they've got their own whole life cycle going on within themselves, their little ecosystems, they're starting to diverge. For example, there's no reason that behind that router layer they will have to be .NET, or they will have to be written against the SQL database or anything like that. And they are actually beginning to change. We've got people using different frameworks to serve these things up. We've got a multitude of Nancy, Service Stack, OpenRaster API serving things. We've had, I think we've got Solar, Elasticsearch. Whatever that team feels is suiting them best is whatever they're using.
So how do you handle kind of common cross-cutting concerns, sort of like security, login?
The router does most of that stuff because it's in the front.
Right.
I don't know how far back it is, but remember
Yeah,
right,
I
it
knew
takes all
about
the
that.
calls.
Facade.
So that facade does most of that stuff.
Right.
And we ensure that every call goes through. So you've got all your security and your logging happening there. So it's not a concern of being manipulated actually. And they've also started to split apart their own deployment scripts as well. One of the teams has gone back to batch scripts. Okay, it works for them. That's fine. It's like 5 lines long. One of the other teams is using Node.js to do their deployment scripts. Yeah, and because you're not really cutting into each other, you can do whatever you feel works. Also, they've changed the way they're doing deployments as a whole. Our .com team does what we call blue-green deployments. This is where we've got a whole bank of servers, say 8, we'll designate half of them blue, half of them green, and you will deploy to, say, the green ones, but all production traffic is going to the blue one. And at some point you'll flip the switch, and they'll go the other way. And that means that going live is really easy, and you're basically testing in production if you're doing any testing behind the scenes. So that's working for them. It's fantastic.
So in that model there, where you're testing on the ones that are not in the load balance, are those still pointing at the same underlying databases as the production?
Yes. Most of the stuff is you can gather by our problems maybe is very good game.
Just thinking how that would have scaled to other environments that aren't read-only. Because most aren't, in my
Most aren't.
experience.
Most are. I think you'd have to try it. I think a lot of places do this kind of thing, doing or 10%, I think, if Facebook, whatever, they still like 10%, same kind of idea. So they must go with something I haven't researched that.
Test data, yeah. Or test accounts or whatever.
Test accounts, we have lots of test accounts, we make purchases and stuff like that. Yeah. But we've still got loads of things we haven't done and want to do. our servers are not generated when we do a deployment, so we're not doing that final piece that we saw in the microservices talk. We're not bringing up servers to put things on at the point of deployment. We're not doing that auto-scaling we talked about because of that reason. We've got no way of bringing up extras and taking them down, but that's what we want to do next, so that everything is like one button that's sort of scalable automatically. We've also still, unfortunately, got quite a big database still cutting it away by pieces by wrapping it up in these services. And then they'll start bringing that into different ways of storing our catalog and metadata. And one thing which I didn't put a slide in for this is those one big deployment scripts I talked about kind of got neglected, and now no one wants to use them either. So over time, you've got to keep an eye on everything you start using. You've got to watch all the little things you put in to make things better, and such as that. So I thought I'd go through like a day in the life of the change. I hope no one gets noticed. Right. So each of the pieces of work will come along, and I'll start with analysis. You'll have, which will happen with both development and QA together. We do a lot of pairing. There is no QA team, like I said, it's a product team. So you'll work together, you want to analyse whatever the piece of work is, figure out what it is you want to do. And then you'll probably develop it together as a pair. And we do TDD. So you've got your whole red, green, in fact, the cycle that goes on. And then we commit that into source control, which is currently Git. And our CI server will come along, pick that up, and try to compile it and run the unit tests. In our example, it fails. So we go back to the TDD cycle, find out why it failed, why it didn't work, and we'll recommit that change. At which point we build a unit test, and it's temporary, it will work. But our acceptance tests, which are ones that take slightly longer and are deployed onto the server, this time they failed. Maybe something wasn't quite working when you integrate with other things. So you go back to the TDD cycle, we develop, we find out what was wrong, we reproduce it, add some more tests, commit it into source control again, gets automatically picked up, build a unit test are green, this time our acceptance tests are green. And these are all auto-triggered, except for QA is not QA as in the team. That will now go, we've got it deployed on some servers, our tests are fine, let's just give it an eyeball, make sure it does actually fit what we asked for, and that can be done by the developers or even maybe even the marketing team. You just check it's actually working as expected. We missed a bit. So we go right back to the TDD cycle, we add just extra tests, we add the extra features that weren't quite right, we commit it into source control again, automatically gets picked up once more for the build and unit tests, picked up for the acceptance tests. This one, give it another check, it's working, and you can press that one button out to deploy it out to production. That's a couple of hours I'm talking about. Followed by some smoke tests, just to make sure it's hunky-dory.
Is that a real button or a virtual button?
Actually, one of the other two did actually have a real button. It's like got a launch on it, and you can plug it in with USB.
Do you have a red
but we
one
don't
as well?
really use it.
Stop.
No stop. If it doesn't work, you can just roll back.
When you're talking about acceptance tests, are they acceptance tests across your entire stack?
No, those ones are generally in each product. If you want ones across, but they'll be using, it depends actually, different teams do different things. Again, for
So
us
what would
it's
happen if a change went in one of your siloed products that broke a dependency that another group was depending on?
well, the acceptance test might not pick it up because the point is for the individual products to know that it's happy, and they tend to work on stub responses from the other ones to minimise the impact and what is going wrong.
But at some point it's going to have to come together.
Exactly, which is possibly production, or possibly UAT. So we do the smoke test in the UAT environment as well, which is live-like. So if you're all there and you start finding the test fail against all the other, that's our integration point. But it can slip through, ends up in production, you find out, you watch your metrics, you roll it back.
Okay. So you're kind of saying that you're comfortable with potential defect going into production?
We're comfortable that we can recover. We would have hopefully found them before that point. Through all the testing and the UAT integration point, we're comfortable that we can recover from it very, very quickly and easily.
What tool set do you use for your acceptance test?
It depends on the project. Ours is one of the team I work on, which is managing that facade.
Right.
We just run effectively the equivalent of curl commands because it's an API. .com team, I think they run something like Selenium, I think. Yeah, for their stuff. So that's what's applicable to them. So they've got a web front end. Exactly. We do have a couple of rules though to make this all run smoothly. No feature branches. This one always gets a reaction. You can't integrate if your code is not known to the rest of the, to your integration point. So everyone develops on the same branch, the master branch, and if there's something big happening, we use feature flags.
Can rebase it.
You can rebase, but if it's too long, you'll have a bit of a problem. So we try and keep it down to, you're checking pretty much every couple of hours, and you're pairing as well, so you can pull.
I'll just use the main form.
Yes, the master branch. I like that. See, that's what I normally say. Really? Yes, we will develop against the master branch, but we will possibly take a release branch at one point if we're doing. It depends on how the project works. Our team will take a release branch, but that's dead. That branch is dead once it's gone out. It's just there for to put a stake in the ground. But yeah, we use feature flags for anything that takes longer than say a couple of days.
So can you just expand a bit on that feature flags?
Just basic configuration settings, and then you just big if around a bit of code.
Right.
If this is turned on, do it. If not, don't. And then
So
later on.
toggles effectively.
Yeah, toggles. Yeah, and if it's not working, switch off until it's ready.
How do you handle just kind of when you've got to make a sweeping kind of architectural change that affects multiple groups? Like we just changed to use Maven as our build principle, and that affected multiple teams.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all happening at the same time.
One thing we did recently, we upgraded our whole database to SQL 2012, and that was everywhere. Because it was going to catch all the little databases that are still using the central server. Lots of coordination, really. Teams are quite small, but you could definitely have representatives from each team. You just make sure you're all scheduling the work together, really.
Do you want to check that you actually know technically that it's going to work? What you're proposing?
That's what the integration point of UAT is for as well. We did everything there first.
Yeah, at that point you're doing it all in trunk. Fundamentally. So if another team is trying to deploy their feature change, that's like a one-liner, it's going to pick up all this half-implemented SQL Server upgrade code.
Managed actually to, by trying to keep things small, by keeping all the products small, to not really hit that often. Quite likely. Because if you're like you say, you've got another team, that stuff is related to them. They're isolated in a way. And we don't really fall into it. And we did take that release branch that I told you about. If you want to take a stake in the ground, you could if you're desperate. Cherry pick it into that and you release the release branch. We try and keep it quite small. Hello.
You're sitting there, 5:30 is your pair, hacking away, 6 o'clock, 6:30, you want to go home, but you're not quite finished. I know a lot of developers who, I just want to check it in somewhere. Do you leave it on your machine, or do you slip into the coffee machine, or?
To be honest, what do you mean by quite finished? If it's not breaking any tests, can't you forget it? I don't know.
I don't know, people tell me they want to put somewhere, they've not finished doing something, and they want to go home, they just want somewhere to store it.
It's
Local database.
well,
What do you
yeah,
mean
there's
local
Git stash and
database?
all that kind of stuff. Just
Local DBC.
we use Git, so you can commit it locally and not push.
Right, so you have Git, so you've got a local repository.
Yeah, but
Okay.
we try to keep. Yeah, we'll do that. But you will try and keep your changes small,
So-
so you should be able to push them.
Yeah, so since you've got Git, you've effectively got a tiny, really itsy bitsy
Indeed.
branch under the hood, which if you're in, say, Visual Source Safe, you haven't got. So yeah, that explains that. Fits in. Those people who express the problem to me aren't blessed with Git.
Oh, you poor guys. Seriously, get
Blessings me with that.
Go for SVN to get if you can't get. Okay, so before you do any release, it's all builds must be green, all the way up the stack, all the unit tests, all the acceptance tests. You don't want to miss something that shows up as being potentially flaky or whatever. Just they have to be green regardless. No releases after 4 p.m. because we want to make sure someone's around if it goes wrong. Similar thing with no releases on a Friday. We don't want anyone going, quick, weekend's here, release run. So same thing, it's just make sure someone's there to read the metrics and roll it back. You've already asked all your questions, any more? In 5 minutes I've been told.
I've got a question about your product kind of teams. So it all sounds like it makes sense having small teams focused on a single product. From a business perspective, how do you manage when you've got work that is there's a lower priority work for like the .com team, but there's loads of really high priority work to do for the API team. So there's too much work for the API team to do. And then do you keep your .com team working on the lower value work because that's their product, or do you kind of move them about?
We try not to move them about too much, but it has happened a little bit. Recently, we've got a higher priority product that one of the other teams have. So we've moved maybe one person in there. We try not to get the teams any bigger than like 4 or 5 people. I think they're probably about 6 people right now, because again, they're a high priority.
But do you move individual people then, or do you move the entire team? Okay.
Because if you think of the product teams, they've got all the ownership, the knowledge. They are the experts in there, so you don't want to like move them on to something else that's losing too much information.
But then equally they're used to working as a team,
Exactly.
so they're familiar with how each other works.
And if you add one person, you don't break it too much.
You could
Well,
consider
then,
moving
why
work.
Sorry.
Why don't you rotate people through different teams?
It's voluntary if you want to rotate. There's no enforced rotate, but if you like your team, you can still do it. But if you want to, you can.
Oh, so you do rotate.
It's not enforced, that's it. If you want to, you can.
Second question, do you do A/B testing?
No, not really. It's something I think the .com team will look into as part of that blue-green, I mean, it's like phase 2 and something like that. You'll have to ask Anthony behind you. This guy asked, sorry. Hi. You had a question?
No, I actually suggested you could move the work around instead of the people.
Moving the work around is another option. If we find out, if it's more a case of the instead of being high priority and having lots of work, they're actually really working on 2 things. Split it into another product and take the team with it, you know, that kind of thing. So you've got to analyze it too. Yeah, that's a really good idea. We have done that a few times. Like that facade team used to deal with the whole downloading of files as well, but we realized that had a lot of work, so we split them off into their own team, and they just deal with the file downloads, while the others just deal with the authentication and routing. So that happens a lot too. Who else next? I can't remember.
I just wonder what your approach was with regression testing.
Because we've got all the automated tests, acceptance testing and unit tests, that kind of is given for free. But if there's a massive change, we can run some eyes over it. But it won't just be like the QA team, it'll be all of us, because we understand the product.
I just wondered when you actually did it, or
Only if we felt that it was a big change that can affect a lot of things.
It's
But so not really.
It's not something you do
very-
with every release. You just do it when you
Because
think
we
you
feel
need
it's part of the pipeline, it's all been done for us.
So on a related note to that, I think you were saying that you started this journey with big monolithic kind of
Indeed,
application,
yes.
broken it down into microservices, built the tests into that as you've
Yes.
gone. But where you started off from, I assume you've made some changes, then you've had a quite manually intensive testing cycle before you have to push them out to product.
That's that testing triangle you have again.
You had to flip that round,
Yeah.
got that. So at what point did you kind of satisfy yourselves that actually we have enough, we've ticked that kind of triangle, that pyramid enough round now, that we have enough coverage that we can abandon this manual testing cycle? Because it's a confidence thing, isn't it? To me, when you ask a question at the start, how quick can you push something out to prod? Well, actually, we push it out pretty quick. But is it going to break everything? I don't know. So then in that cycle, you've got that whole set of manual tests. So at what point, you know, did you use any kind of algorithms around test coverage to say we can stop doing this now and replace it with this? We've got confidence.
I think what happens, this was right at the beginning of my career at 7digital, there was more a emphasis on if you're doing a manual test, code it up. And eventually you coded them all up, and then you broke them down with the rest of the code.
So you continue to do those scenarios you hadn't automated.
Pretty much,
So that would come down effectively until it got
Yeah.
pretty much to
So if you found you're doing something like that, try and code it up.
Who has a view of the whole system? I mean, if you're breaking down into these teams, these project teams, who knows how it all integrates?
Probably the facade team,
Right.
most likely, but everybody has a rough idea of everything. We try to do those kind of cross-team knowledge sharing, that kind of thing quite often. But probably the facade team is where the most overarching.
Is there any concept of a project?
Yeah, there have big
What would be
concepts
a
of
project?
projects. They're rare and few between. For example, bringing on a big client. And then that once they're on, they're on. Maybe they've asked for something specific. So to get them in, maybe.
Generally, it's a project-free environment.
Because anything is driven into a product design and a product roadmap rather than a project roadmap.
I think that's a natural consequence of what you were saying. But I was just wondering whether the concept of project is largely redundant here,
Indeed.
the way it should be.
Is there any more questions? I saw your hand.
So I can see how this works really well for your website. What about all of your applications?
The devices.
Yeah.
I think it works very similar because you can put out changes, you can deploy, especially if you've got like an Android app or something. You try not to do it too often, granted, and actually what they've been started doing is sending around the APKs as that's really their kind of pre-release checks. They send the APKs around to the whole thing and say that's their
But do you try and sync them up?
there's not really no need to sync them up as such.
Presumably they need a new feature will need a back end. And
Then normally the backend comes first.
Right, and it just gets deployed into production and not used by.
That's normally what happens. The service will be created and then the app will be used.
Sorry, I don't want to digress too much. Something you said earlier about 5% innovation.
Oh,
Is that driven down from top, or is that staff have their own opportunity to do what they want? Or is it done on like a team basis, or do you guys actually do it? Because lots of companies have the opportunity to do it. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, but I have to do this work because this is more important. My priorities like.
The way it's done in our case is you can book it like holiday. And if you booked it, you can do pretty much what you like with it. The only rule is you get 2 days a month and you've got to write it up afterwards. And the write-up is just more a case of so you can share it rather than anything else. So you can do pretty much what you like. I played with the Oculus. I had great fun with it. It's pretty, pretty impressive. Anything else?
Very last one. When you kind of went to this model of having the microservices and all that kind of stuff in the case of the monolithic approach, were you able to roll that out piecemeal?
Yes.
Or would you use it a big bang kind of get rid of the old one and put all
No,
the
but that's the thing. It's still kind of hurty. I'm wondering if I can get back to it. No, I probably can't. But that monolith app, this is the trick that we did, is actually still the router is still the monolith app. We kind of aped it from the inside out. So as far as any cooler was concerned, it's the same thing. And we kind of like locked it in behind. So there was no.
I was thinking more of the database side of things, whereas if you showing that with those smaller, you've got the new database, whereas there might be older services that are running expecting that data to be somewhere else. That's what I was kind of thinking.
You try to wrap everything that's using that data to use the service. It's kind of a gradual process.
Right,
So say you've
you
got.
to other bits
Yes.
to use that service
Yes.
and not look for
So say you create a service that creates users or manages users, you create a user API, and everything that deals with users will get changed to use the user API. And then behind that, you can change the data store. It's all very slow, but very much worth it. It takes a long time. Yeah.
Chris, that's it, I'm afraid. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Cheer people.
Thank you.
Probably was. Back in here in 15 minutes.